Hey,
Hello.
how are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you for jumping on. I really appreciate it.
More than welcome.
I thought it would be a great way to. I'm starting a like season A series, so I'm going to try and interview everyone who's kind of going into the show. And I thought this would be a kind of a fun way to start it off, having you on, having a judge on, just because I feel like there's just been I think there's not been a lot of opportunity for athletes apart from the posing seminar that has just kind of happened this year, but a lot of opportunity for athletes to kind of outside of judges' feedback to really kind of understand what's going on with the judging and that, especially which a couple of things I'd love to talk about with, I guess some people feel there's inconsistency or even how there's been a bit of a different judging in Australia compared to with all our recent athletes going overseas. So I thought,
Yeah,
yeah, one way to kind of start it all off.
yeah. And funny enough, you say that. We actually used to do workshops where we would include it in the posing seminars that people stay back at the end, and we would actually run through dummy judging
Oh,
in
cool.
front of whoever wanted to stick around, where we would be watching on screen athletes walking onto a stage, and where we had to take it in turns as judges to sort of give our feedback on that athlete as they're walking on stage. Um, so people could actually stick around and see how that went on and ask us questions about how we work things out. So that sort of dissipated a little while ago, but we're starting it up again in season A, where Tony has invited anyone to come along to these seminars, coaches, athletes, anyone in the industry that wants to come along, ask the hard questions, and or ask whatever they want to ask.
Yeah, no, I think that's really
Yeah.
cool. I think it's
And
really,
Tony's a very open book.
yeah.
You ask him a question, he'll give you an answer.
I think maybe just due to COVID, it had just unfortunately kind of
Yeah,
slowed everything down a bit
it
and
really did.
so long to get it all kickstarting again.
Yeah.
So I guess the first thing that I kind of wanted to start off with was what kind of got you into bodybuilding? Because I remember you telling me that you were also a figure athlete. So
Was
was it being an athlete first and then kind of getting interested in, oh, well, how can I kind of stay within the sport and go to judging? How did it all kind of start about?
yeah. And so what got me into bodybuilding, I guess, I was always really intrigued by athletic and muscular looking physiques.
Yeah.
I remember, I'm going to show my age here, I was about 12, and Terminator 2 had just come out, and I was watching on screen, on the big screen, Linda Hamilton doing chin-ups and looking at it going, wow, like that is just crazy.
Yeah.
And I was about 12 at the time, and I just thought, I want to look like that. And then I guess, that's something that you think when you're younger and you don't really think much of it. And back then, certainly the fitness industry wasn't what it is now. I took up training, oh gosh, a long time ago, maybe 25 years ago. Um, and I got that thought in my head again. Like I worked out really quickly that I developed muscle quite easily. My body, I'm Italian background, so I naturally have like that kind of hourglass
Yeah.
figure. And I could see my body changing really quickly, and it put the idea back in my head again, that I wanted to compete. I started working in a gym part-time around that time, and my boss at the time was an old school bodybuilder, and he kept saying to me, you need to compete, you need to compete. But I was about 18 at the time, and too busy on my weekend. Weekdays were fine, but weekends I just wanted to go out drinking and clubbing and stuff. So kind of put it to the back of my mind. And then a few years later, I was training at a different gym. I wasn't working at the gym anymore. And I had a personal trainer, and I said to him, I want to compete one day. And he kind of looked at me and said, oh, no, you don't have the right body for it.
Wow.
And that was like challenge accepted.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, I mean, at first I kind of thought, oh, maybe he's right. He's a trainer. I'm not. He knows what he's talking about. But it never kind of died in my mind. And then I just put it in my head that before I turn 30, I want to do a figure comp. And when I was about 27, I said, that's it, I'm doing it. And I started training. Back then, my first comp was in 2007. And I can tell you right now, there was no social media. There was not as much. We got all of our information off like bodybuilding.com, all the forums and that kind of thing. But there was no, I think Facebook was just starting. There was no Instagram.
Yeah.
There was just no information out there. And even then, my first show was in what was back then IFBB, but it was, now there's Elite, the Elite, 5BB Elite and IFBB Pro League, and they were kind of combined at the time, I guess. Yeah, so I competed with them, and I mean, back then there was only for females figure or bodybuilding. That was it.
Oh, really?
And then there was bodybuilding. That was it. If you wanted to compete, that's what you were doing. So that just shows you the progression of the sport, how much it's grown. A few of the other federations had sports model at the time, which is now sort of, changed into bikini. A couple of years later, the IFBB introduced the bikini division. And then from there, just the division started growing. So yeah, I've been around the sport for quite a long time now.
So then in that regard, would you say figure back then when you did it, it was a lot different to what it is now?
Very much so. Yeah.
So what would you say? Would you say figure maybe would have been back then when you competed, I guess, in between bikini and what figure is now?
Yeah, yeah, I'd say so. It was still more muscular than what bikini is now. But nowhere, I wouldn't say it's quite, it was quite as developed as figure is these days, no.
What, did you only do one show?
No, I competed, I can't even tell you how many shows I did. I did a lot.
Ever place?
Yeah, my last few seasons were my best ones, I'd have to say. I mean, I placed in the earlier seasons as well. I didn't place in my first season. I think I got my second season, I got a first and a third. And then from there, I was placing like seconds and thirds. And then that's my awesome. Last few seasons, I was doing well.
That's good. So what was it like then? I guess you would have kind of been a part of that, also that transition of kind of figure becoming what it is now. Were you still competing during that transition?
Yeah, look, it did come a bit of a way in the time that I was competing. So I competed for 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
And in that time, it did develop. And yeah, I look back at my photos and you can see the progression, even in what was on stage back then, like as it went on. It did develop, but yeah, it still, when I stopped competing, it wasn't where it is right now.
Yeah. So when, I guess, did you kind of go from competing to, because you're saying when you IFBB Elite and IFBB Pro League was one and then they split off, how did you, I guess, kind of come about, whether it was meeting Tony or meeting another head judge? How did you kind of blend into then getting a position as a judge?
Yeah, so back then the league was run by different people. Tony was always he was often the MC and he was a promoter down in Victoria, but he wasn't like the president of the federation or anything. And I did a bit of judging with them in the seasons that I wasn't competing.
Okay.
So you kind of do test judging to see how your scoring goes. So your scores aren't actually marked, like you submit them, but they don't count to anything. Just to make sure that you're on track with, how you should be scoring people, I guess. And, you're not scoring people that are coming last as first and stuff like that. They just want to make sure it's consistent,
Yeah.
So yeah, I did a little bit of it back then, and then I didn't for a few years. And then when the two split, I'd known Tony for years. I've got family down in Victoria, so whenever I'm down in Melbourne, which back then was quite often, I always go and train at Doherty's in Brunswick. And Tony's always been like the most welcoming person in the world, so always knew who he was. I always knew him pretty well. But I was living in Sydney at the time when that split happened, and Mark Gretsch, who's the New South Wales promoter, he's my old coach.
Okay.
So he was coaching me as a figure athlete. And so I had a chat with him and I just said, did I chat with him? I think he might have come to me and said, are you interested in potentially coming across as a judge. And so I did.
That's cool. So
I started, I've consistently been judging ever since then. I think that was 2017, maybe.
Yeah. That's cool. So I guess in that way you kind of had the connections already made prior to the split and everything, because like you're saying, you always saw Tony when you were in Melbourne, Mark was your coach. So I guess,
yeah.
How did you kind of, because I know, like I used to play basketball before I got into bodybuilding, and I used to do refereeing, and I remember you could apply, and then you would, like you're saying, do these practice alongside the other referees to make sure you're learning and you're knowing what you got to do. How did you kind of, I guess, get into the judging in between your seasons where you weren't competing? Did you just ask the panel of judges? Was there an offer? Like, for example, if someone was watching this and was like, oh, I've been interested in judging, how would they go about it? Or is it kind of limited now that you have all the seats filled?
No, they're always, obviously, there are a lot of us judges, but quite often think people have other commitments and they just can't make particular seasons or whatever. So, and people drop off, like people can't stay committed forever. They need to leave for whatever reason. So I guess, in bodybuilding, always looking for people to do the job. And it would just be a matter of, having a chat with either Tony or one of the head judges or the state promoters. And just getting in touch with the head judges and seeing how to get into it. And generally it would be coming along to our workshops, joining on our group chats about, what's going on in the seasons and judging criteria and all that kind of thing. And then doing your test judging.
Okay. So that kind of stems into, I was going to say, obviously, I guess, we'll go back to one of my original questions, which was, one of the reasons why I wanted to get you on was to do with, I'm interested to hear your opinion on the consistency with, well, before that, actually, the difference in, overseas and the Australian judging. Because, I understand that the IFBB and the Australian community that's the federation, and we're part of that umbrella. So a lot of people, because we had those athletes compete overseas, noticed, and it was something that was talked about a lot. So one, I'd like to hear your opinion as a judge, why there is that kind of difference. And then how much has that changed, I guess, now, the past couple of years since judging full time compared to when you were kind of doing it in the beginning?
It's really hard for me to say why I think there's a difference between here and overseas. All I can tell you is we follow our guidelines, which are the official IFBB and NPC guidelines. I know there's, especially in the bikini division, there's always a bit of controversy about, we're getting marked down because we're too hard. The judging criteria actually states that you can't be too conditioned. That is one of the criteria for bikini judging, is that we want conditioning, but we don't want muscle separation. We don't want striations. We don't want, the levels of hardness that you see in the other women's divisions. We don't want separation between, we don't want to see striations in your glutes or, clear separation between the glutes and habbies. We want nice full round glutes and roundness in the shoulders, but without being too hard. And that's what's in the criteria. And we are literally following the criteria.
Okay.
With regard to, specific seasons or anything like that, we are bound by who turns up on the day.
Yeah.
So all we can do is mark what is in front of us against what our criteria is and award whoever fits it best, if that makes sense to you.
And that's why, I guess, sometimes, say at a state show, you may tell one athlete, look, you're perfect, bring this to nationals, but then you have a whole set of new athletes, and then even though they were perfect there, they're not as perfect here.
When they're up against somebody who, just
it's that criteria more.
Hits them out sometimes. Yeah, because at the state show, they were the epitome of it, but then you've got someone who won a different state show or placed well and just, kept working, comes back and just nips them out. Unfortunately, it's who turns up on the day.
Yeah,
and you can't predict until the day because there's all sorts of variables.
Yeah, so I think sometimes I think that's something that a lot of athletes forget. And I think that's where that whole, it's politics kind of things comes into it, but it's really just simple.
I can promise you there is no politics. And I'll be straight up with you. I generally try to avoid looking at who's doing what seasons. I don't want to know coming into a show what athletes are going to be on stage in front of me, because I don't want any preconceived ideas of who might win or anything like that. It's funny because someone might turn up at the state show and look like they've got the most potential, and then they come in at nationals a little bit off.
Yeah.
We can't then judge them at the nationals based on what we saw at the state show. We've got to judge them on how they show up on the day, if that makes sense. And it's unfortunate because sometimes somebody might just spill over a little, or not carb up enough, or whatever the case might be, and just come in that little bit off, and we can't award it to them because that's not who's in front of us. And that's why I try to avoid, like, I follow a bunch of the amateur athletes on social media, but I try and steer clear of focusing on knowing who's doing what shows. I'd rather not know. I'd rather just turn up on the day and be surprised. And there's always going to be a dark horse that comes out.
That just rocks up and shocks everybody.
That is not on social media, or doesn't post photos, or doesn't even say that they're doing a show, and they just rock up and blows everyone out of the water. And that's usually a really good thing. I love seeing stuff like that.
So that surprise, which is
100%.
Because that kind of goes into what I was going to ask next, which is how hard is it to not be subjective? Like, it's something that, is always discussed a bit, because you have a criteria that you want to follow, but at the same time, you always your eyes might naturally draw you to what you particularly like, but you're like, oh wait, does that really fit the criteria? How do you kind of balance that?
You've literally just got to focus on, this is my job to do this correctly. And look, if there's one judge that sways to something different to what the majority views as, the winners, because it's based on a score system, it's going to be with majority.
Yeah.
If that makes sense anyway. If we judge someone that's completely off the charts with whatever everyone else is judging, our scores get looked at individually. So we'll get pulled up and asked, why did you mark that person as first when everyone else had them as fifth or sixth? Like, what's the reasoning? And you're asked to explain. So
so that's cool. So kind of you got to keep yourself accountable, and that's like
100%.
That you judge.
Yeah. And the same goes with, we run on an honesty system, in that if there's any judges that coach any athletes, they are not on the judging panel for
that show.
Or not necessarily that show, but those divisions.
Or that division, you got
their athletes in. Yeah, they either step down, or like another judge will fill in. Same with the opposing coaches. We always have to we have to disclose any relationship between any of the athletes and judges, so that it can be obviously taken into account and have replacement judges put in.
Yeah. No, I think that's important to hear. I think that's good that, I feel like sometimes, I think that it's interesting. I didn't know that it's good to hear that you yourself as judges are held accountable by that head judge. So, if you do kind of slip up, or, maybe favor one side and it kind of goes against everyone else, you do get talked to. I think that's really good for our athletes to hear that, that's something that they don't need to worry about.
Yeah. And the other thing that they've started doing is that for nationals, what they've been doing is selecting the judges that have had the most accuracy in their scoring.
Okay. So the ones
rather than it be who wants to judge at nationals, it's these are the people that.
Yeah, these are the most consistent.
Yeah.
Would you? So you've been judging for a long time, or since 2017. Would you ever consider being a head judge, or you prefer just the role that you kind of already have? How does that head judge position work?
I'm not sure how that gets appointed, but at this stage I'm happy to just be a judge. Yeah,
that's all right.
I have enough responsibility outside of bodybuilding, so
don't want to add more onto it.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, I love judging, and wherever I get the opportunity to travel to different states to do it, I will.
Yeah.
I really enjoy it, and I love the sport. So, and it's kind of my way of giving back to the sport as well. So, yeah, I just really enjoy doing the judging. So if I've got the opportunity to do it, and I've got the time and the means to get interstate for the shows, I will. But yeah, as far as doing head judging at the moment, I'm just happy to sit on the panel.
See what happens.
Yeah.
So what's your favorite category or division to judge? Would it be figure as a figure athlete or?
Oh, look, it's funny because it used to be like figure and men's bodybuilding. But as the sport's grown and I've done more and more shows, I actually really enjoy most of the divisions for their own merits.
Yeah, for their own uniqueness.
Yeah. There's none that I really don't enjoy judging. I love the look of the classic physique.
Yeah.
I think like just that old school classic look. That look for me is awesome, but it doesn't mean that I prefer judging that over anything else. The open bodybuilding, that's where you see like the freaks come out.
Yeah.
That's always good to see. So yeah, I don't know. I can't really say, like each category has its own reason for me to enjoy judging. So
yeah, no, I definitely understand. Like I remember when I first got into sport and started going to shows, I didn't kind of enjoy all the I didn't enjoy men's physique. I remember I didn't really enjoy women's physique and bikini. And then I just, as time went on, I just kind of, same like you're saying, I just ended up going, you know what? I can applaud each, like you're saying, each class and division has its own merit. It really does. Yeah. And you can just appreciate the hard work that they've put in to achieve that look.
Yeah.
Something I know that's also a lot of athletes are always interested on is when it comes down to like a really, really close call. Let's say you have like in an overall, you have two people that are same conditioning, matching on size, matching on symmetry. What, as a judge, is like those little things that you go, okay, we're just going to give that extra 1 point? Is it something like we all consider posing, or is it the way their tan look? And
everything comes into it? Yeah. If it comes down to the, like, you cannot pick. So generally what we'll do, especially if there's two, we'll run through the posing and literally just focus on those two athletes. So if I can't pick between two, what I'm doing is watching just those two and scoring each pose. Who wins?
Yeah, who wins
by pose?
Yeah.
And if you still can't decide, it's overall. Like it comes down to literally everything.
And that's when I guess that's why you have more than, a couple of judges, so you can go, okay, who's got the average?
Yeah, 100%, because it's not always going to be a unanimous call and things like that. Yeah. And it's not always unanimous. I don't, it's not like, I know like the top 5 or 6 generally in the first call out will be your top 5 or 6.
Yeah.
And obviously the person that looks like they're going to win is usually put into the center and things like that. But if I don't agree with what's up in front of me in that particular order, I'm not writing it down in that order. I'm writing it down in the order I believe it should be.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not always what we see or what the athletes seeing on stage may necessarily what the judge's opinion is.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's going to be very close to the mark there, and usually it will be on point, but not always.
Well, for example, let's say someone
just because the head judge has put somebody in the middle because he thinks that person should win.
Yeah.
Or is, placing first at this stage, I might be looking at the person he's got in second going, no, I actually.
And then that's when that average point kind of comes into play.
Yeah.
And another thing that I know a lot of people want to know as well is the posing routine. So there's been a lot of talk about does the individual posing routine really count towards the score or not? I know just as a whole, in even the pro league and that, is it more just when you do the call outs, then you decide? When you do the mentories, you decide, and the posing routine is just for the show? It's not necessarily counted towards any points for the overall?
Yeah, look, I think especially in the amateur league, where a lot of the time we've got time constraints, and sometimes we can only see the top three, for example, doing their posing routine. And that only happens when the show is like really massive and it's just, there's not going to be enough time. So obviously in situations like that, it's not going to, you know, the posing routine is more for the show than for the point system, because we already know who the top three are if they're the only ones that are doing their posing routine.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's more for the show. But in saying that, what we call the routine for people like bikini and men's physique and women's figure, when they come out and do their eye walk and that's their routine, that's definitely counted. We are looking at them from the second they walk on stage and starting to do our judging from the second they're doing those eye walks.
And that's because that's kind of what that's part of, I guess, the mandatories of that category in comparison to, you know, open and classic.
Yeah. That's not to say for the open and classic, don't focus on your routine, because obviously we want to see good routines. We want entertainment. And it's always, I am personally, the routines for me captivate me. Like, I love watching a really good posing routine, someone that's put time and effort into showcasing their routine, not just, you know, improvising on the day because they just couldn't be bothered. It's always really a really nice addition to see a really well thought out routine.
Do you think something like that could then be reminded back in, let's say, when it's like really close between 1 and 2 and you go, oh, okay, we can't decide, but hey, this person actually really put in the effort and really showed off their physique in the posing routine? Does that kind of correlate then?
Yes.
Okay. Back to the thing that I talked about at the beginning was that, especially, I know there was a lot of talk with the last season that just went by, with that kind of, it seemed a bit inconsistent with, it seemed like sometimes they were rewarding mass over conditioning. Is that kind of go back to what you're saying about the average of just who's on stage there?
Yeah. If you're seeing something like that, it's generally because there's nobody that specifically fits the criteria. So you've got to go on what's in front of you, and I guess then it comes down to a bit like it's an opinion-based sport, really. So especially with the men, because with men, for example, the judging criteria is a combination of mass and conditioning and symmetry. So if they've got 2 of those 3 things, then, and somebody else only has 1 of those things, then it's going to go to the one with the 2. So it just kind of, it's very subjective, and it just depends on who's in front of you in the day and who fits the criteria best.
So it's just, it unfortunately can then, I guess, like what you're saying, be perceived that you're going more towards the size, but that's not always the case, because it's just what's the person's been that criteria over that.
100%. 100%.
With what you're saying, it's really interesting. Like, I think, like, I props to you as judges to really, like, it must be one. I have to say, I think it must be one of the hardest sports to judge.
Hard.
Because, like,
it's hard work. It really is. People just think we sit there and, you know, I don't know, cruise around and it's, you know, just write some things down on a sheet. It is hard work. It's a long day. I'll give you an example. I flew down to New South Wales to judge the New South Wales state ones in season B last year, and it was a record number of athletes. And we didn't know what to expect until registration happened, and there was a record number of athletes. We started the show at 10 a.m. I think we walked out of the doors. I had an 8:30 flight to catch home. And I think we finished at about like 7 p.m. or something ridiculous like that. And we had a 10-minute break the whole day.
That's ridiculous.
So it's a really long day, and mental exhaustion is physically exhausting. So, you know, you are concentrating from the second the first athlete walks on stage until the last division. Switched on.
Do,
But
do
yeah, it's not an easy job. And, you hear a lot of armchair judges, oh, I would have done a better job of judging. Well, come and do it.
have a go. See if you can have a 10-minute break and last the whole day, be switched on.
Yeah, yeah. Eating your lunch like while you're trying
Yeah.
to write notes and write feedback for, because that's the other part. As well as sitting there judging, we've also got to provide feedback for athletes if they want it. So
So you're doing the feedback at the same time.
while we're doing it,
Oh my
we're writing
God.
little notes for each athlete on our judging paper. Oh, not on the scoring sheets, but we've got judging papers with everyone's name and their number
Yeah.
and what divisions they're in. And we're writing feedback on that to hand in at the end of the day so that the people that respond to the have all of the judges' feedback to give back to athletes.
I always thought that feedback was done after the show, and that's
Done while
why
we're
it took
doing
some
it.
time to get back to you. But it's actually done during the show. That's
Done
great.
during the show, but it takes time because they've got to collate all of the judges' feedback to
Get into like one.
Yeah, and I've been on the feedback panel before where I've had to be doing the feedback, like as in responding to athletes, and it's a pretty clunky system. Like you've got to go into like different pages and stuff to respond to each one. So yeah, it can take a little bit of time. It's just because it's such a there's a lot of feedback to put together.
And especially when, I guess, one thing about bodybuilding is it's not like a big company where, you hire a lot of people to kind of do that. You're all kind of self-investing anyway. So, there's a small amount of people to do what really, like you need, let's say there's 8 of you, but really you need like 20 of you to be a lot more efficient.
Yeah, and while we're at that, hats off to Simone Collins. I'm just going to give her a shout out because she's like the machine behind it all. She puts everything together for us and makes our life a lot easier. But she does a work of about 30 people each season. Yeah, I'm pretty sure she doesn't sleep for 5 weeks at a time during each season.
Do you think that it's hard, too, as well, being that it's a self-funded sport, but with the growth of it, and especially in Australia, getting like we are having so many record-breaking days and stuff like that, and with what you're saying to do with the judging, do you think that it would be better to split the shows over 2 days like they did with nationals, all females on one day, all males on the next day? Because some people may feel that they may get overlooked, or because there's not enough time, so there's not enough I guess comparisons between athletes, like someone who's in a second call that feels like maybe they could have been in the 5th, but there was not enough. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I get what you're trying to say. I don't know if at state shows it's warranted. I think that, like when I explained New South Wales, I think we were just underprepared for that. We didn't expect those kind of numbers. But potentially, and it's definitely something I can, raise with Tony and see his thoughts. But you've also got to remember that doing it over 2 days means, we've got to find a venue that is going to be available for 2 days for each state on top of nationals for 2 days. You've got to get all the volunteers out, backstage, judges, everything to do the 2 days, but you've also got to pay for a venue for 2 days.
Yeah.
And the venue buyout is not cheap. So I just don't know. I mean, I don't know logistically whether it's viable to do it or not. Even sponsors coming out for 2 days and that kind of thing. Whether or not it's viable, or maybe, I don't know. I've never been involved in those discussions. I think having the nationals over 2 days is definitely it was a godsend. I really enjoyed having it split up. It just took a bit of pressure off, especially time-wise. We weren't so, you don't feel so rushed. But also with us, it gives us a bit of a break as well. It's hard to get through that many athletes in one day and stay sane.
Is season A's nationals going to be broken again into 2 days?
Yeah, it's over 2 days, I believe. Yeah.
Okay, so there may be, I guess that's something that in the future that we could possibly see with maybe state shows, if logistics, those little things.
Yeah.
Because I guess it is something that you Tony and everyone else involved will have to, I guess, try and work out how to manage, because the more the years go by, I guess we're going to continue to break records. And it's just that argument of, do we introduce a third show? A lot of athletes are wondering if do we introduce a third show, but then it's just like, how is that really going to work? Time frame in that. And then are you going to even have enough athletes in a third show to really, make it plausible to actually do the show?
Yeah, but you'd find, I reckon, that if there was a third show during the year, that, people would sit out season A or season B. So, it just gives people more options in terms of timing. Timing doesn't always, a lot of people don't compete at certain seasons because the timing doesn't suit them. Season A, you generally have to diet over Christmas, New Year, that kind of thing. And I know, there's a lot of cultures that have big celebrations over that. And yeah, like dieting does mean sacrifice, and bodybuilding is a highly sacrificial sport. You have to be prepared to give stuff up. But, at an amateur level, for someone that has no desire to turn pro, for example, and there's a lot of athletes that, aren't there because they want to turn pro. They just love competing.
Yeah.
Do they really want to be dieting over Christmas? Maybe not. So, they might just choose to do season B. Other people, it might be their birthday around season B. So they want to do season A. So it just, and look, you'll get the more serious ones that don't care. They're just going to diet through anything. And I know when I was competing, I didn't care. Like I just would diet through whatever I had to diet through. But for a lot of people, it's just a hobby. So yeah, maybe having a third season during the year, or maybe making the seasons not so big.
Yeah,
having three smaller, one massive national show or something, or even two, and then just an interim show in the middle. I know we used to do, for many years, they used to run an all-female classic in July.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was always the female divisions. And then I think the last show that they did may have had men's physique as well.
I guess, in that regard, though, I guess, a lot of athletes are bikini, and a lot of men's physique or classic. So it's that thing of like, with those people taking up a lot of the numbers, you could maybe, like you're saying, have that middle one in the middle of the year where it gives you more opportunity for them to kind of split the numbers up a bit more.
Yeah, 100%. I also think potentially COVID had a lot to do with that dying off as well.
Yeah.
We had 3 years basically of nothing, or intermittent shows, because we just didn't know if we could have a season or not.
Because I remember Tony did a Q&A the other day, and someone asked him about the Arnolds, and he said, hopefully, 2024, but that, it was just due to COVID, unfortunately. It really affected the sport. It
really did. It did. I don't think a lot of people appreciate how much was lost for, and it's not just IFBB, like all of the federations, promoters, sponsors, all of that. So many people
gym
lost
owners.
Gym owners. Oh my God, definitely.
What I guess has been your biggest highlight, or I guess most favorite, fondest memory, or a favorite moment, like judging? Like, has there been a season that, or an athlete, or someone that's really just stood out, or a moment that you remember where all the judges were really just captivated, or was a really close battle and you weren't too sure who was going to win?
Oh, there's been so many close battles, I probably couldn't even tell you which one would be my favorite. Probably the most memorable, I guess, since I've been in the pro league judging, was when Cyril won his pro card.
Yeah, in 2019.
I can't remember what year it was. He just came out, and he just had these quads that needed their own postcode, and we were all just like, I'm pretty sure collectively on the judges table, you probably would have seen most of our jaws just drop. We were just like, whoa.
I remember he actually trains at my gym at Tweed.
Oh, does he?
Yeah. I remember it was in 2019, and I was talking to him and stuff, and then he was telling me he was doing the shows, and I was like, oh, this is going to be awesome. I'm really excited. He's like, because I didn't know that he already had a pro card in a different federation.
Yeah.
And he was like, "Yeah, I just really want to get to Olympia eventually." And I'm like, "Man, you're huge. Like, this is going to be awesome to see." And then it was funny because I remember he came out and no one really knew who he was. And
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
know
None of us
I
had
know
any
him.
idea. Like,
Everyone was
he was
like,
just this dark
"Oh,
horse.
yeah."
Yeah.
So
And that's what I'm talking about. That's what I love seeing when I'm judging, is just someone that comes out of the blue and blows everybody away.
yeah, do you, I, it's interesting. I feel like I'm just trying to think back to the past couple of seasons since then. I wouldn't say there's necessarily been a dark horse again like Cyril, but there's definitely it's been a lot more competitive. Like when I think back to season B, like when you look at the classic and you had like Coben, Matt, all the boys there, Joseph, like it was just
Yeah.
a really competitive season. So I think it's cool when you kind of have that mix of either dark horse like Cyril, or you just have that super competitive where it's neck and neck.
Yeah, and they're always fun to judge as well. Like, it's always fun. You see they all display really good sportsmanship, which is great. But you just see it on stage, like seeing them battle it out and it being so close. It's always awesome to watch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's cool to, I guess, kind of hear that the judges appreciate that just as much as we do as competitive.
Oh, yeah.
Even because I feel like sometimes, in other sports, there's that kind of disconnect between a judge or a referee and the sport or the athletes. Like they're just so focused and they're not really necessarily enjoying. They've become really objective about it. Where I think it's really cool to hear that the judges are just as much as, it's another reason why bodybuilding is so good, and so it's such a great sport, and such an awesome community.
Yeah. Look, we all of the judges on the panel all love bodybuilding. We're all very passionate about it. So for us to see stuff like that on stage, like where it's, neck and neck and they're all really high caliber, and it makes our job really tough, but it makes it really enjoyable because, I love seeing that kind of dedication come out on stage. It's awesome.
Last question to kind of wrap things up, and I know you kind of say you don't really pay attention to anything because you don't kind of want to get that pre-subjective view, but is there anyone or is there a particular, I guess, division that you've seen that there's a lot of athletes competing in that you're really excited about coming into season A?
Yeah, I wouldn't say any specific individuals, but I think the two divisions that they just keep progressing are the classic physique and bikini.
Yeah.
And we're just seeing so much really, really good talent here in Australia in those divisions. So, I'm really, really excited to see what comes out in season A in those divisions, because I know that we've just got such good competitors, and they're all getting more and more competitive now because the caliber is just getting so high that everyone's just, stepping up.
Which is good. I think it's good for the sport. It's good for Australia, and especially, I hope more athletes also in this year travel overseas and we get more opportunities to kind of, show the rest of the world that, don't count us out. Because I think,
100%.
I think
so many of our athletes did so well overseas in season B.
Yeah, especially the amateur Olympia, and even Emma winning a pro card in Japan.
Yeah.
And the two other athletes in the Olympia, that was awesome.
Yes. Yeah.
Are you are you judging? Are you judging nationals and any other state shows, or?
I'll be judging Queensland, potentially Sydney, and depending on, I guess, if I'm selected to judge nationals.
Oh, okay. So it's a selection process.
I'm assuming they'll be doing the same as what they did for season B. Yeah. So.
Well, thank you so much for jumping on and sharing all that information. And
thanks for having me.
And hopefully, a lot of athletes that are able to listen to this can take a lot from it. And all I'm looking forward to, obviously, I'll be at the Queensland show, so I may see you there.
Yeah, come say hi.
Well, have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
You too. See you.
Yeah.